Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DRAS Talks, an interview series, a new initiative by Defense Research and Studies. It is an honor to have Commodore AJ Singh as our speaker on a rather refreshing subject, evolving submarine arm of the Indian Navy. Before we move to the subject, I would briefly reflect on the illustrious career of Commodore AJ Singh. Commodore Anil Jay Singh is presently the Vice President of Indian Maritime Foundation and Senior Vice President of a leading European MNC. Commissioned into the Indian Navy in January 1981, he served for 3 decades as a submariner and anti-submarine warfare specialist. He has commissioned 4 submarines and fleet ships. He has served in the Directorates of Naval Plans and Submarine Acquisition at the Naval Headquarters and was a directing staff at the Naval War College and Chief Instructor Navy at the National Defence Academy. He was also India's defence and naval advisor in the United Kingdom and thereafter the Deputy Assistant Chief Maritime in Perspective Planning and Force Development in the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Defence, Integrated Defence Staff. A postgraduate in Defence and Strategic Studies, he has participated in numerous multilateral Track 1.5 initiatives. He has co-chaired the ASSOCHAM's Defence and Aerospace Committee and is a member of Defence Audit Advisory Board. So, well, the task of examining, explaining, and simplifying the technological development in the maritime domain is challenging. The aim of the interview is to acquaint our civilian and uniformed audience, particularly the young scholars, with the changing prospects and developments in the field of submarine warfare, along with the analysis of India's capability in the same. Without further ado, we'll start with the session and my first question to Commodore Singh. So, shall we start?
Yes, please. Thank you.
There exists a race among the leading armed forces of the world to expand their submarine fleets. Do you think that the submarines are getting more lethal and stealthier day by day?
Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me on for this new initiative of yours. I follow DRAS very closely, and I'm very impressed with some of the work that it does. So I do consider myself privileged to be on this panel. Thank you very much, and thanks also for your kind introduction. Coming down to the subject per se, yes, we have noticed in the last few years that more and more nations are investing in submarine capability. Now, submarines are platforms that are expensive to build, expensive to maintain, and expensive to operate. So not all navies can afford to have submarines, but all those who think they can look at it as a very aspirational capability to develop their maritime security construct. Particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, when the Cold War ended in 1989-90, it was expected that the importance of anti-submarine warfare and submarine warfare would recede because they didn't seem to be a threat since the threat of the Soviet Union had disappeared. But as the the focus shifted to the littoral, and with China's rise, the global geopolitical center of gravity shifted to the east, to the Indo-Pacific, and China's own belligerent maritime sort of attempt to dominate the waves. Nations realized that submarines was a very important capability that was required to check and blunt the dragon. And so one finds that if you really notice in the last few years, there are numerous navies, whether it's Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Australia's ordered 12 submarines, South Korea, Japan, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and now we've just given a submarine to Myanmar. So all these navies in the last 8 to 10 years have augmented their submarine capability or are in the process of doing so. And the reason for that is with technology having become, with so much technology now, the surface of the sea has become very transparent. So if surface ships are to operate at sea, large frigates and destroyers, they become very vulnerable because they can be tracked by satellites, they can be tracked by aircraft, they can be tracked by other ships, they can be tracked by submarines. So anywhere they go, their movements are known. It is only submarines which can operate well below the water, stealthily, silently. They pack a huge weapon punch. They've become far more lethal, they've become far more silent, and so they remain the last sort of offensive cutting edge of any navy. And that is why one notices more and more nations are investing in submarines. In fact, Europe had started cutting down its armed forces over the last few years. But in the last 3 to 4 years, again, Denmark is looking at submarines, Sweden is ordering new submarines, Norway has ordered new submarines, Germany is building new submarines, France is building new submarines. So submarines are definitely going to be the offensive, like I said, the offensive cutting edge of a navy's capability, and this is likely to continue for the next few years, definitely so.
Thank you, sir, for putting in the, I would say, historical and contemporary, both the perspectives on this particular subject. So my second question would be, China has proactively accelerating its submarine program, like you just said. The frequency of the submarine patrols by the People's Liberation Army Navy has almost tripled in the last 2 years in the Bay of Bengal. So, how can Indian Navy counter this Chinese aggression? And do we have credible anti-submarine warfare strategy in place to counter the PLA?
China is adopting a very historically proven way of global domination through the maritime route. In the finest traditions of Alfred Thayer Mahan, who was an American naval strategist, they have realized sea power is the key to global power, as has been with the case of as was the case with the Europeans who colonized the world, or subsequently America after World War II. So China has, in the last 2 decades, now become the largest navy in the world. And not only is it the largest navy in the world in terms of surface capability, it has the largest number of submarines in the world. Yes, it is still probably not as technologically capable as the US Navy, which has bigger ships and more powerful submarines. But China is heading in that direction. They are building 20 to 25 ships a year, including submarines. So the submarine threat from China is very real. And if China is to dominate the global sea lanes, then the domination of the Indian Ocean is critical to China. And that is why you find more and more Chinese naval ships entering the Indian Ocean, patrolling in the Indian Ocean, and that includes submarines. Uh, Submarines, operation of submarines in helps a nation understand the maritime dynamics of a region. What is the hydrology like? What are the oceanographic conditions like? And that is why it is important for them to not only come in from a military perspective, but also come in from a research perspective. They come, they collect information, they collect data, they go back, they analyze that, and they understand the region better. So we have seen that a lot of this movement is happening into the Bay of Bengal, into the Indian Ocean. They've given 2 submarines to Bangladesh, which means that now they can comfortably. I mean, they have no reason. They can legitimately say that they need to go to Bangladesh because they are supporting the Bangladesh Navy submarine effort. They're giving 8 submarines to Pakistan. So India needs to be very wary of this sudden submarine proliferation from China, which is taking place in the waters around India, particularly the Bay of Bengal, because the Bay of Bengal is a sort of a closed water body, and it's very important for India's maritime security to ensure that we can keep the Bay of Bengal clear of any adversary operating in those waters.
So I think India is also catching up, and Mazagaon dockyard has acquired credible expertise now in construction of submarines. So what do you think are the components that are being imported for the production of these submarines? And by what time can we manufacture a fully indigenous submarine, including the weaponry associated with the same?
See, Mazagon Docks is doing a great job at the moment. They're building the Project 75 Scorpion class submarines. However, unfortunately, and this is something that naval planners must understand and keep in mind, the Indian submarine progressive indigenous submarine construction has been very haphazard in India. We built 2 submarines in the early 90s, in 1992 and 94, INS Shalki and INS Shankul, which are still sailing. After that, because of political reasons, this program was terminated. Those boats are also built in Mazagon docks. Now, no nation can afford the luxury of creating a submarine building capability, putting in that kind of investment, and then shutting it down after 2 submarines. So from 1992, we did nothing till 2005 when we signed a contract with a naval group of France to build the Scorpion class. So literally speaking, we had to start all over again in trying to build submarines by ourselves. Now, The Scorpion class does not have very much of indigenous content, frankly speaking. If you take indigenous content in the Navy, we look at three elements of a ship, and we can apply the same analogy to a submarine. It's float, move, and fight. So the float element is the part of the ship which is required to to make the ship float in water, which fundamentally means the hull of the ship. So far, the steel that is being used for submarines being built in India is not Indian. It's imported because it's a special grade steel. But, and this is very important, but the nuclear submarine Arihant, which has been also built in India, which I will tell you more about later, the steel for that has been built in India. And it has very clearly been articulated that any new submarine that is built in India from now onwards, after the Scorpion program is over, will be built with Indian steel. So the moment you have Indian steel, your float element straight away, you have 90% indigenous content because the float element is mainly about the hull and the steel and other materials that are being used for building the ship to keep it floating. Then you have a move element. The move element is about engines, diesel generators, motors, the things which make a ship move, pumps, systems, pipelines, etc. Now, in this, India is making some progress. Most of the valves, the pipelines, some of the systems, the electronics, a lot of it is being done in India. But important things like the main motor of the submarine, which makes the submarine move, the diesel generators which charge the batteries to make the motor move, all these are still imported. But as we go along and we start building submarines on a sort of a production line basis, unfortunately, so far it's been bits and pieces. You build two, now you're building six, then you'll build another six. So it doesn't make sense for industry to make that investment if all you're going to do is buy two diesel engines from them or four diesel engines from them. But the moment this becomes a chain production, a production line is set up which keeps churning out submarines one every year or one every 2 years, then automatically the industrial capability will build. Insofar as the weapon element is concerned, which you referred to, that we call the fight element. At the moment, most of the submarine weapons that we have are imported. But let me also tell you, notwithstanding that, uh, most of these weapons, that's the missiles and the torpedoes. Submarine main weapons are torpedoes and missiles. The torpedoes and missiles are all at an advanced stage of development happening right now with the DRDO. So we hope that by the time the next class of submarine is built, whichever is the next class, let's say Project 75I, that would be equipped with Indian sonars, Indian radars, Indian torpedoes, Indian missiles. The BrahMos missile is being developed for a submarine application. So work is happening in all these areas. These are very high technology things. This technology doesn't come overnight. It takes time to build. Nobody shares this kind of technology with you from abroad, so you have to do it yourself. And so it's work in progress. And I'm very confident that another 8 to 10 years, by the time the next class of submarine starts getting built, lot of that submarine will be Indian and indigenous, and not so much imported.
My next question is also based on this particular indigenous technology itself. And in October 2018, India's only SSBN completed its first deterrence patrol. Do you think that commissioning of INS Arihant in Indian Navy completes India's nuclear triad, or is still there a long way to go?
Yes, it does complete the nuclear triad, in taken in very simple terms, because now we have a nuclear weapon delivery platform on land, we have one in the air, and now we have it at sea. Of the three, the sea element is the most complex one, because here is a submarine which is operating hundreds and thousands of miles away from your coast, hundreds of meters below the surface of the water, and you have to be able to give it pinpoint instructions on targeting a nuclear weapon, the timing of the nuclear weapon, and yes, whether the nuclear weapon should be launched or not. So to make that happen, it's not only about the submarine or about that missile, it's about the complete ecosystem that is required to make sure that that weapon is delivered so many miles away, so many meters below the sea, at the precise moment on the precise target you want it to go. Now, this sort of command and communication network and organization that has to be put in place is what sea-based deterrence is all about. So, to that extent, the first patrol that Arihant did in November 2018 was very creditable because it proved that we can deploy a SSBN, a ballistic missile nuclear submarine, and we have the complete wherewithal in place now to ensure that it does what it is supposed to do. Now, that is insofar as your triad was proved that yes, our triad is there. But is the triad credible right now? Now, for that, you have to have more than one SSBN. For a triad to be really credible means that at any given time, there should be one submarine at least at sea which should be able to deliver that weapon. To have one submarine at sea to deliver a weapon at any given time, you need a force level of at least three SSBNs. At the moment, we have one. The second one is likely to get commissioned soon. The third one is being built. The fourth one is being built. So this, uh, so to be really to say that is our triad complete would happen when we are able to keep a submarine continuously at sea on a deterrence patrol. And all the navies which operate SSBNs at the moment, where there are only 5 countries which do that: America, Russia, France, Britain, and China. All of them have this concept of what they call continuous at sea deterrence. Britain called it CASD for short. And last year, Britain celebrated 50 years of continuous at sea deterrence. That means for the last 50 years, there has not been a single day when they have not had an SSBN at sea on a patrol. Now, when you have that sort of capability, that really makes your triad credible. So we have to reach that level before we can say, yes, our triad is now absolutely complete to take on anybody at any time of our choosing or the enemy's choosing.
So I think with that, India has joined some of the elite clubs for this particular nuclear triad, and probably soon we'll be able to have a credible deterrence as well. So now the next question would be, India is working towards the development of the underwater vehicles, both manned and unmanned, for the deep sea exploration. It has successfully developed the remotely operated underwater vehicle as well, which can go to a depth of around 6,000 meters, and is working towards the development of manned submersible, which can take the scientist on board for carrying out the deep sea exploration. So, how do you think India can exploit this capability for defense and anti submarine warfare operations? And can we use the same technology for detecting the seabed mines as well?
Yes, you're right. Most of the underwater research that is happening, even if it is happening in the civilian domain of just pure scientific research, has a dual use purpose. It can be used for military applications because, like I said in the beginning, it is extremely important for us to understand what happens below the water, and that is something we don't know very much about. The more we do research, the more we do exploration, the more our scientists go and find and collect data, the more comfortable will we be with what happens under the water, what are the kind of conditions that prevail underwater. Oceanographic conditions can change day by day. It depends on the weather, it depends on the tidal stream, it depends on the currents, it depends on the temperature of the water, temperature profile, the salinity profile. It is different near a coast, it is different 50 miles out at sea, it could be a lot different 100 miles out at sea. So to have a comprehensive understanding of that okay, generally in the month of, let's say, February, what are the oceanographic currents like? What are the kind of waters we expected to have? What is the temperature profile of the water going to be? This requires years and years of research, study, analysis, collation, and thereafter coming out with results. And this is very important for submarine operations because submarines use the, the profile of the ocean, the hydrological profile, to decide where they want to be, for what mission they've been sent, what depth must they operate at. Are they trying to avoid the enemy? Are they going to attack the enemy? Do they have to, is their priority right now to detect the enemy at the maximum range or to stay hidden? So all this you decide based on what is the profile like. You calculate, we on board the submarines, we calculate, okay, this is the profile, this is the depth we should maintain for so-and-so role that we have to do. So all this information, if the more the information you have, the more you can operate better. Now, knowing information about your own waters is one thing. Knowing information about your enemy's waters is even more useful. So that is why you find the Chinese are more and more now coming into the Indian Ocean with their research vessels to get more information about the Indian Ocean. Because this is where they have to combat the Indian Navy tomorrow. Their submarines have to come and operate in the Indian Ocean. They must understand, they would like to know how does the Indian Ocean, what are the oceanographic conditions in the Indian Ocean? How can they best operate their submarines? And how can they best counter the Indian submarines over there? So all this, so it is very important. And that is why this research, right up to 6,000 meters, is very important to understand the seabed. Secondly, unmanned and manned submersibles are a subject of what is the requirement. Both are important. Both collect information. Unmanned may be a little, maybe may have a different role to play. Manned may have a different role to play. So that depends on what the requirement is. What are the kind of data you're trying to collect? And as technology improves, we will find that we'll be able to go deeper and deeper, collect more and more information, both in manned and unmanned submersibles. So I think it's a very important dual use capability to have this sort of research capability available in your own country. It is important.
I think China is precisely doing the same. And in the South China Sea, China is doing a lot of unconventional activities in the name of research. And it has done the mapping, as you suggested in the earlier answer. It has done the mapping of the topographical features which are present in the sea, like the canyons, seamounts, etc. And it has named them in Chinese as well. Analysts believe that this is a part of psychological warfare from the Chinese side. So, is it a useful exercise, and what are your views on this? Also, with respect to the India's perspective, does India need to carry out the similar deep sea exploration in the Indian Ocean region itself?
Firstly, China and the South China Sea. Now, as far as China is concerned, the South China Sea is China's sea. Anybody and everybody who's there is trespassing on Chinese territorial waters. So that's something they have made sure they've told the whole world. So they have named their islands, they've named the Spratlys in Paris, has given them Chinese names. So that they are not, they say there's no argument on this. Now, why have they done this? They have done this not because they like to have land or they like to have islands, because the more territorial sea they claim, the more they will be able to exploit that sea for its resources and the minerals and everything that comes with the sea. The future of the world lies in the sea. You know, you heard of blue ocean and etc., blue ocean economies and all that, because sustainable development is going to come from the sea. So China is ensuring it's already got the largest fishing fleet in the world, which it sends all over the place, does all kinds of illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. But it has realized that that is the key to its future economic success. India must do exactly the same thing, but not the way the Chinese are doing it, not in a belligerent way, not by poaching in other people's waters. We are doing it, but we have barely even scratched the surface of what lies below the sea. We have an exclusive economic zone of almost 2.5 million square kilometers. I don't think we have done any, we have done, I mean, I'm not saying we've not done, but we haven't done any meaningful research. We need to do a lot more to be able to utilize that 2.6, 2.4 million square kilometers to our benefit. We have been given exclusive seabed mining rights in the middle of the Indian Ocean for exploring for polymetallic nodules. We were given 150,000 square kilometers. We surrendered 75,000 square kilometers. But even the remaining 75,000 square kilometers, we have barely done any research so far. So it is time that we reoriented our whole approach to the maritime space and gave it the importance it deserves, because the India of tomorrow is going to be economically sustained by the sea. We just do not have the land resources to support a population that we have or will have 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. So it is very important. And that does not mean that just kind of ravage the sea of everything. It is all about sustainable development. So unless you don't understand the sea and what is below the sea, how can you even think about doing sustainable development? You don't know what you have to sustain, what requires to be carefully handled, what can you exploit more. So to get all this picture of all this, we definitely need to do far more than what we are doing. I know there are initiatives like Sagar Mala and all, but I don't think they've also addressed this problem in its entirety. Unfortunately, the maritime domain in India is still not getting the attention that it deserves.
Absolutely. And like you suggested, that this area, the maritime domain, is going to be the future, and we have unexplored resources there. But what about the environmental concerns like the seabed mining that are there? Various international agencies have highlighted these points. And do you think that seabed mining should be banned? And what can be the best next alternative to seabed mining without affecting the ocean ecosystem?
See, like I said, we have to understand the oceans first. Only when we understand the oceans or we understand what lies below the water can we use that effectively without causing undue damage and for the long term. And that is what blue economy is all about. The SDG 14 goal is very clearly about sustainable development of the oceans. Climate change is affecting the oceans. A lot of factors are affecting the oceans. Like I said, China is going and doing what we call IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Last year, their fishing fleet was operating on the Galapagos Islands, in what is perhaps the most sensitive marine biodiversity area in the world. It has been recognized as a UNESCO heritage site because it's so delicate. And there were the Chinese were there with some 40, 50 fishing fleet vessels of theirs operating with impunity. So that is where the problem is of what you said, seabed mining. Yes, seabed mining could damage the oceans permanently if not handled properly. So first we have to understand what is there, what is the kind of mining that can be done, how can it be best done, how can it serve mankind and still not damage the marine biosphere, which is as it is very delicate. So all these factors have to be taken into account. Address these yet, and so we run the risk of going into something we don't understand fully, but want to exploit. So yes, deep seabed mining uh, can cause damage to the marine environment, but if handled intelligently, if handled with knowledge, can become a source of global sustenance without that damage, without damaging to the extent that we would damage it if we didn't know much about it. I agree with you that it needs to be tackled very, very carefully.
So I think there needs to be more research done in this particular area before we went ahead on this particular
Oh yes,
thing.
definitely so.
Yes.
Definitely so.
Also, Chief of Defense Staff recently has favored spending on cruise missile submarines rather than a third naval air carrier, which requires a fleet of 5 to 15 other ships for its protection in the event of a war. So, do you support his views on this thing? Also, what is your take on submarines as an alternative to aircraft carrier?
Well, it's like comparing, frankly speaking, apples and oranges. If you ask me in one word to say it very bluntly. And it's sad, if you look at it, it's tragic that even at the level of a chief of defense staff, there is such a poor understanding of the importance of the maritime domain and maritime security. And this is something that is really sad. Uh, Aircraft carriers and submarines are not a zero-sum game that if I have more submarines, I don't need aircraft carriers or vice versa. Submarines have a role to play. Cruise missile submarines have a role to play. Nuclear submarines have a role to play. And so do aircraft carriers have a role to play. If aircraft carriers were not important, let me just put it this way. If aircraft carriers were not important, why would the five largest navies in the world still be operating aircraft carriers and still be investing in building new aircraft carriers? If they are such expensive platforms. The Americans are building aircraft carriers. The Brits have just built two aircraft carriers. The Chinese are continuing with the aircraft carrier program. The French are building an aircraft carrier. The Russians, who never had aircraft carriers, are also now operating aircraft carriers. So there is obviously some merit to operating an aircraft carrier. I won't go into the merits, what my views are. I'm just laying out the sort of framework. Now, India has also had aircraft carriers for many, many years. But we've never had large aircraft carriers. We've had more or less what are called air defense carriers, not strike carriers, because they've been smaller. Vikrant, Virat were small carriers. Vikramaditya is somewhat a strike carrier. And if we do get Vishal or the IAC-2, which is being spoken about, 65,000 ton carrier, that will be a strike carrier. Now, India wants to be a member of the UN Security Council. That means it wants to play in the big league. When you want to play in the big league, you should have the power to play in the big league. The aircraft carrier gives you that power projection capability over the oceans to play in that big league. Now, whether we should have aircraft carriers or not aircraft carriers or submarines is not the Chief of Defense Staff's level of decision making. This is a call India has to take. Does the leadership of India want India to be a major player in the world, or be a bit player and say, okay, we are quite happy. We've got our Bay of Bengal, we've got our Arabian Sea. We'll keep this safe and we are happy. But if you want to be in the big league, if you want to be an Indian Ocean power, if you want to be a Indo-Pacific power, then you've got to have the kind of capability required to be an Indo-Pacific power. You should be able to project that power. The aircraft carrier is the only platform which projects that sort of power, and India needs it. And to say that because an aircraft carrier needs 5 or 15 ships around it is not a viable proposition is again shows a lack of understanding of the maritime domain and of how navies operate. That those 5 or 15 ships are not only protecting the carrier, they are the might of your navy. 3 ships, if you pick up a submarine 100 miles off, 3 ships can be detached from that and go and hunt the submarine down. If you find an enemy aircraft approaching, 3 ships can be detached and go and strike down that aircraft. So it's not that 5 ships are required just because the carrier is operating. 5 ships add far more power and punch to that carrier which is operating, besides protecting the carrier, of course. There's no doubt about that. But imagine the carrier, it can move almost 300 to 400 miles in a day. You have a floating air base with so much missile power, so much sea power on it, so much weaponry with the carrier battle group, which can move 400 miles in a day. Imagine the kind of things it can do. That is something that somehow seems to escape people's attention. And they say, oh, aircraft carrier is vulnerable in war. Everything is vulnerable in war. Tomorrow, if a Rafale gets shot down in war, that's also vulnerable. Get shot down, it gets shot down. That's what war is about. So I think we need to understand the dimension in which aircraft carriers operate. And this statement by the CDS that I'd rather have submarine than have a carrier really reflects very poorly on his knowledge of the maritime domain. I'm sorry to be saying this bluntly, but that is a fact.
I hope India will start working on another aircraft carrier soon, rather than acquiring it. Also, I think you rightly pointed out the need for the aircraft carrier, and I think you added a new perspective onto it, which I think was missing earlier. So, how many submarines should Indian Navy possess in the next 1 decade to accomplish our maritime objectives as per Indian Navy's perspective planning? And how many of them should be nuclear submarines with the SSBN capabilities? I think that would also help in the credibility of the nuclear triad.
Yes. Okay. One is my view how many submarines we should have. I'm a submariner, so that we'll keep that aside. The Indian Navy in 1999 had prepared something called a 30-year plan for indigenous submarine construction. That plan had envisaged at that time that we will build 6 submarines. We will set up one production line to build initially 6 submarines with a foreign collaborator. We will set up a second production line with another foreign collaborator to build 6 more submarines because to get the technology to build submarines. So that is how the Project 75 happened in Mazagon Docks. And Project 75I, which should have happened many years ago, but is still in the process of discussion, has still not happened, but that was meant to be the second part of the 30-year plan. The intention was that once you have built these 6 submarines, these 12 submarines, 6 on one production line and 6 on another production line, you would by then have got the technology to build your own submarines thereafter. And then both these production lines could be used thereafter to commission one submarine every year. So that in 30 years, that means by 2030, you see, you have to decommission the old ships also as they get older. The plan was that by 2030, we would have 20 to 24 good modern conventional submarines in the Indian Navy. The nuclear element was not considered in this. It was only about conventional submarines. And this was felt was a requirement of the Navy is about 20 submarines. 20 to 24 submarines are required. Now, if you bring in the nuclear element, firstly, the SSBN. The SSBN is not a weapon of war. It is a weapon of strategic deterrence. So it is not really part of your submarine fleet in the real sense of the term. It is a submarine which is playing a different role. So we keep that out of the submarine equation. Those 4 or 5 SSBNs are required for deterrence and keeping a continuous at sea deterrence. So we keep that out. But as India's role has grown in the Indo-Pacific, as India sees a larger role for itself, it also feels that we must have nuclear attack submarine capability, what we call the SSNs, which are very versatile platforms. They carry conventional missiles, but they're nuclear powered. So they're high-speed submarines, they're quiet, and they can even accompany carrier battle groups, besides carrying out their own independent operations. So now India has realized that perhaps we need to have a mix of SSNs and conventional submarines, which are called SSKs. So the government, I think 3 years ago or 4 years ago, has approved a plan to build 6 SSNs, that is nuclear powered attack submarines with conventional weapons in India, and reduce that 12 indigenous submarines to 6 indigenous conventional submarines. So if this plan goes through and this construction actually happens, which will take 10 to 15 years before this program really is in place, we would then have a force level of, I mean, broadly speaking, about 15 to 18 conventional submarines, 6 SSNs, which is what we want to build, and the SSBN fleet of 4 or 5 SSBNs, whatever the Navy country is looking at. So that is the sort of force level I think the Navy is looking at in its larger planning. And then to maintain this force level thereafter, not increase it, not reduce it, but keep that at about 15 to 18 modern submarines, or maybe 18 to 20 modern submarines, conventional submarines, 6 SSNs, and the SSBN fleet of whatever it is. So that I think is the thought process in the Navy, as we have seen in the various plans that have emerged over the years.
Very interesting answer, sir, I must say. And about the funding part now. Now, as we know that building and operating manned submersible vessels incurs a huge expense for Indian Navy. So, do you think that the unmanned autonomous submersible vessels can provide a credible alternative to the manned submarines in future? Like, do you predict something like this or not?
It's not a question of yes or no. It's a question of when. The way autonomous technologies are developing, yes, they may come a day when they would be able to replace a manned submarine. But that day is still some distance away. Where we are with unmanned technologies right now is that they properly built and properly deployed, are very effective force multipliers at the moment. They can add a lot of lethality to your normal manned capability. But I don't think they're in a position yet to replace manned capability. And we must use it like that for the timing. So they're not the force, they're the force multiplier right now. And if you notice, the way navies are investing in submarines and ships, even today, in manned platforms, including manned submarines. Like I said, the submarine program, every country's got a submarine program running more or less today. Obviously, manned platforms are going to be around for the next 30 to 40 years, safely be around for the next 30 to 40 years. I don't think they're going away anywhere because any submarine's life is 30 years minimum. But as we move along, the unmanned element will become more and more prominent. It will be used for many roles. Already minesweeping is being done more by unmanned platforms than by traditional minesweepers now. So more and more the effort is to take the man out of the loop, take the man out of danger, and see if it can be done through remotely operated vehicles or unmanned vehicles, etc. So yes, this will definitely keep increasing as time moves on. But the way, uh, let me also say that while this is my view today, the way technology is advancing, the way the power of computing is advancing, what seemed like science fiction 50 years ago is very much a reality. And what seems to us science fiction today could well be reality much sooner than we expect. So definitely in the next 1 decade or 2 decades, we'll see a proliferation of unmanned technologies coming to the fore on the surface of the sea and below the surface of the sea. But it will be some time before they can totally replace manned platforms in the same way that we operate manned platforms today.
So I think we still have a long way to go there. And I think the human element would be there, would still be there even after we'll replace it. So, with this, our discussion for today comes to an end. Thank you so much, Commodore Singh, for sharing your knowledge on such an important and complex topic. And I'm really sure it will leave all our listeners much better informed and will add to the existing scholarship on the subject. On behalf of the entire DRAS team, I thank you once again. And it was really an honor for me to interview you. Thank you, sir. Have a good day and Jai Hind.
Nikita, thank you very much.
Thank
Your
you, sir.
questions were really, very, very probing, and I enjoyed being a part of this discussion. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on DRA.